Chapter 7 will discuss setting goals and objectives. We'll explain the benefits of the program hypothesis, the purpose of and criteria for a complete mission statement, the relationship between agency mission and program goals and objectives, the purpose of and criteria for a goal statement, the parts of a complete objective, the components of an outcome, the purpose of an outcome objective, the ways in which outcome objectives fit with goals and with process objectives, and the ways in which process objectives and activities work together. So as a part of this, again, we'll talk about goals and the program hypothesis and how it relates to setting goals and objectives. So from program hypothesis to goals and objectives, all components of the program hypothesis fit within the phases of the logic model. Problems and needs experienced by target population, provision of services to address problems, the monitoring service provision, and expected short-term and long-term results of services provided. So the fit between the logic model and the program hypothesis, again, if you remember way back to chapter 1, looking at the components, the inputs, process, outputs, outcomes, and impact of the logic model, those different components that we saw there, we have that now with this specific program hypothesis. So an example for each of these. So inputs, just as a refresher, those are the resources and raw materials. Examples here, women who are victims of domestic violence primarily due to dependence on their abusers. Resources including trained staff that will contribute to improving client self-esteem, reducing social anxiety, establishing ties to community resources, developing financial management skills, learning job skills, and placing them in a job with a career path. As we get to the next level, process, activities that use inputs to achieve objectives with raw materials. So some examples, individual and group counseling to address personal, emotional, and psychological problems, case management services to facilitate and support making appropriate community contacts designed to build a sustainable, steady lifestyle following treatment, financial planning services designed to manage income and meet basic expenses, and employment training and placement. So again, you see these various aspects of process there. With the outputs, the measurements of services provided and completion of all the services prescribed. So here the example, each service provided would be quantified so that it would be possible to measure both intermediate outputs, the number of units of service provided, and final outputs, the number of clients who complete all the services that are prescribed. As we move into the outcomes or the demonstrated benefits to those receiving services, you'll see here an improvement in self-esteem, reduction in social anxiety, knowledge and skill in using community resources for independent living, demonstrated ability to manage finances, demonstration of ability to perform critical job skills, placement in a job for which the client was trained, and reduced incidence of returning to the same or another abuser. And then finally, that last component, the impact, the measurable changes occurring in organizations, communities, or systems as a result of services. There will be a community-wide reduction in the number and percentage of incidences of domestic violence reported among women who are victims primarily due to dependence on their abusers. And so, again, you can see the logical flow and the connection here with the logic model and the program hypothesis for this example. The function of a mission statement. A mission statement formalizes the reason for an organization's existence by providing a long-term sense of direction and continuity. A mission statement establishes broad and relatively permanent parameters within which goals are developed and specific programs designed. A mission statement includes a target population and a statement of the agency's vision for what ideally might be achieved in collaboration between the agency and the target population. A good mission statement is lofty, inspiring, concise, and understandable, and stated in outcome terms. A mission statement is formally approved and sanctioned by designated officials in public agencies and by boards of directors in private agencies. The mission statement should be the most enduring part of the organization. Goals and objectives, these actually provide a framework for action. So goals establish a general direction for a program. Objectives establish precise expectations of what the program is attempting to achieve within a time frame. Activities specify detailed tasks to be carried out, and objectives and activities provide a framework for monitoring, performance measurement, and evaluation. So looking at the relationship of mission, goals, objectives, and activities, figure 7.1 here shows program activities kind of at the base of this triangle, moving up to program objectives, program goals, and the organizational mission. In terms of looking at the formulation of goals, things to consider. Goals focus efforts and are intended to be compatible with an agency's mission. Goals are statements of expected outcomes dealing with the problem that the program is attempting to prevent, eradicate, or ameliorate. Goals are responsive to problems and needs and represent an ideal or hoped for outcome. Goals provide a sense of programmatic direction and do not need to be measurable or achievable. Goals are also political statements and are written to build consensus. Objectives and activities are designed to move toward achievement of a goal. Looking at objectives and the formulation of objectives. Effectiveness-based program planning requires identifying results that are to be achieved and the way in which results will be achieved. Specification of results is a statement of ends or expectations of the program referred to as outcome objectives. Specification of service provision is a statement of means used to achieve ends referred to as process objectives. So again, that linkage between the means and the ends. Activities are delineated under process objectives and identify details of program implementation. Outputs become a measure of units of processes and activities invested in the program. Okay, so again, looking here, the logic model as it's applied to process and outcome objectives here in figure 7.3. The inputs, again, the clients or consumers, resources to address the problem or need. The process, here we'd see the process objectives, the activities that we just mentioned on the previous slide. The outputs, the documentation of the completion process. And then you see outcomes here, that would be the outcome objectives that we just discussed on the previous slide. So again, looking at the connection between the means and the ends here. And then the impact, the documentation of change in problem or need. Another figure here that's helpful to see, you notice our goal is here at the kind of top of the figure that we see, and then we see the next step down looking at outcome objectives, and then we see the outcome objective related to these various process objectives, and again, the process objectives looking at all these, or being divided into all these different activities, or maybe not divided, I should have said comprised of all of these various activities. So this is a fairly good flow chart to understand the connection amongst all of these. Requirements for all objectives. Good objectives have common elements. They have clear, unambiguous terms. Expected results are identified. Expected results are measurable. The time frame for achieving results is identified. Results are achievable based on technology, knowledge, and resources, and they identify who's accountable for achieving results. 5 components should be included when writing objectives. One of those is the time frame. One is the target of change. Others are products or the processes or results, the outcomes to be achieved. The criteria by which the products or results will be documented, monitored, or measured. The responsible party for implementing and measuring achievement of the objective. So again, all of these are vital components to objectives. Clarity. Objectives should be understood and interpreted in essentially the same way by anyone who reads them. Use action verbs that describe an observable change in a condition, such as to reduce, improve, strengthen, or enhance. Ensure clarity and measurability by developing objectives that have behavioral aspects and use verbs such as write, list, increase, reduce, terminate, or demonstrate. You might also think about how Bloom's taxonomy may play a role here. Looking at timeframes, a timeframe is a time frame specified is the date when it is expected that the objective will have been achieved. There are 3 levels of these outcomes. Initial outcomes, the first changes in knowledge, attitudes, and skills of program participants, usually within a year. Intermediate outcomes, the changes in behavior that result from new knowledge, attitudes, and skills, usually within a year. Longer term outcomes, ultimate outcomes that a program desires to achieve for its participants, and so oftentimes these are multi-year efforts. Timeframes should be stated as specific dates, including month, day, and year. The target of change. Objectives specify the population or the elements that are expected to change if the objective is achieved. Looking at results. Client outcomes identify what positive changes should have been achieved by clients by the time they have completed the program. Targeted results should be realistic and not over-promising. View goals and objectives as a contract, and if requested resources are made available, the stated outcome should be achievable. This also reminds me of SMART goals, if you're familiar with that. If not, you can Google that, but SMART goals are also looking at setting measurable goals and understanding kind of the linkage amongst those things about being feasible and measurable. Criteria for measurement. Objectives must be measurable to determine if they have been achieved. State in the planning phase what is hoped to achieve and the criteria for acceptable performance. So for an example here, within 1 year, reduce the incidence of child abuse in District 1 by 15% as measured by the Child Abuse Central Registry. So again, you notice it's very specific here. It's very clear. It also gives a time frame. Okay, responsibility. Identify responsibility for implementation and reporting on the objectives attainment. The statement should include an identification of a title, for example, program administrator, child care program manager, or person by name. The person or position identified is usually responsible for managing implementation, not for carrying out the details of activities. Outcome objectives, they should be developed first because they're the centerpieces of program plans and explain the reason for the program and project measurable results. Outcome objectives flow directly from the problem analysis phase. Outcome objectives focus on a reduction in the incidence or prevalence of the problem or need or an improvement in the quality of life of the program's target population. Outcome objectives are statements that translate a program goal into precise and measurable language. Once outcome objectives are clearly conceptualized and stated, companion process objectives should begin to become clear. So again, this figure shows the hierarchy of goals, objectives, and activities, just as we saw on a previous slide, but we can fill in just kind of mentally some of the other information that we just discussed. Okay, so again, outcome objectives. When problems are complex, outcome objectives may be hierarchical. Intermediate, final, and long-term or impact outcomes. Effectiveness-based program planning for a single organization focuses on intermediate and final outcome objectives. Long-term outcomes reflect the reason for the existence of the program and project expected outcomes in the total community, not one organization's client. So you see that they become a bit more broad. Process objectives and activities. After outcome objectives or the ends are developed, need to specify process objectives or the means that attempt to achieve the stated results. If statements in the hypothesis become the basis for the process objectives, then statement is basis for an outcome objective. Process objectives are always related to the lowest level of outcome objectives, usually intermediate outcome objectives. Process objectives are intended to identify milestones necessary to achieve intermediate outcome objectives. Well-written process objectives require the 5 basic components: time frame, target products or other milestones, result, which is a tangible expectation of the process, criteria by which the products will be documented, monitored, or measured, responsible party for implementing and measuring achievement of the process objective. So again, there are components that are vital to having a successful or strong process objective. When we look at timeframes in relation to process objective timeframes are expressed in the same manner as outcome objectives. Timeframes should be stated as specific dates, including month, day, and year. When we talk about target and result, targets of change and outcome objectives focus on the population in need of change. In contrast, targets of change and process objectives focus on the completion of products, milestones, or other elements needed to implement the program within the stated time frame. Designation of a responsible party by title or name ensures that all will know who is expected to implement and monitor the process objective. So integrating outcome objectives, process objectives, and activities. Goals, objectives, and activities should be coded in a way that easily identifies interrelationships. Processes must be completed before achievement of the expected outcome can be measured. Services must be planned and coordinated so that they are completed prior to the dates specified in process objectives. Activities are specific tasks that must be completed to achieve process objectives. And so again, looking at this figure 7.5, the relationship between the logic model and objectives and activities. So the inputs here: consumers, 30 participants in the program; resources, counseling, community resources, financial training, employment training; process objectives, and you see here the various numbers and all other process objectives. So they would have these numbered out: activities A, B, C, and D, and activities for all other process objectives. Again, that would be written out in those terms that we just mentioned in terms of the clarity, etc. Outputs, a document to be used in screening of 30 participants and tracking completion of all prescribed services. The outcomes, and again, that's where we would list the outcome objectives. And then the number of different objectives could vary depending on your program and the specific objectives that are stated. And then finally, the impact, documentation of reduction in incidents of domestic violence. So is this actually worth the effort trying to integrate these together? So management by objectives is time consuming, but it is an expectation for governmental and many private organizations. And management by objectives is the alternative to offering services without knowing if they are needed, or it's the alternative to being unable to assess if a program is successful or not. So again, there is value here. Effectiveness-based program planning identifies staff activities in precise language and is a proactive approach to ensuring program success. Offers conceptual tools to organize services as program hypothesis testing experiments designed to inform practitioners, administrators, and funding sources about the extent to which a program is achieving its objectives. So can be worth the effort. Okay, criteria for measurement or documentation. Implementation of activities requires agreement on a quantitative measurement that defines completion. Remember to include measurement or documentation criteria in the process objective.